I'm very, very excited today to introduce Michael Leitch, the Senior Technical Lead for the XPrize Carbon Capture Prize. This is a 4-year global competition that invites innovators and teams from anywhere on the planet to create and demonstrate solutions that can pull carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere or oceans and sequester it durably and sustainably. So to win the grand prize, teams have to demonstrate a working solution at a scale of at least 1,000 tons of carbon dioxide removed per year, model their costs at a scale of 1 million tons per year, and show a pathway to achieving a scale of gigatons per year. So I'm going to let Michael tell you all about it, but I notice you're now down to your top 20 ventures, and I was looking through the list, and 2 of the ventures that are in the top 20 are ones that Columbia actually has had a connection with. One is Heirloom. They're the first commercial direct air capture venture, and they spoke at last year's climate conference. And the other is Takachar, who about 1 or 2 years ago, they were a partner in our Three Cairns Fellowship. So it's pretty exciting to see that it's a small world and that there are, some connections already. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your talk. And can everybody please welcome Michael?
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, there we go. Thanks so much. Thanks for the introduction, Karen. Thanks for everyone at the Taver Institute for hosting me this morning. I'm really excited to be here. My name's Mike. I work for XPrize. I'm the technical lead at XPrize, which means I'm responsible for designing and operating the testing and due diligence programs that we use for our competitions. And I'm kind of one of the carbon people at XPrize. I started my career at XPrize working for the NRG COSIA Carbon XPrize, which was a $20 million competition. We ran that from 2015 to 2021. That was focused on CO2, capturing CO2 from flue gas and then utilization. So the idea was flue gas to products. And then in 2021, actually 3 days after we awarded that competition, we launched the carbon removal competition. This is a $100 million competition. And we've been running that since 2021. We're due to award next spring, Earth Day, watch this space. And, but I wanted to start out by just talking about carbon removal in general. Why carbon removal? This is a subject that's sort of exploded in the last couple of years. We like to think that we've played a small part in that at XPrize, but I think it's important to sort of lay down the case, or at least I'll give you my perspective on the case for carbon removal. Global temperatures on the rise. I don't think anyone can dispute this. Record emissions continue to go up. We had a little dip during COVID, and everyone, it was amazing. The skies cleared and, the air was cleaner because nobody was driving around. I live in Los Angeles. It was great. I mean, all things considered. But then we ramped it all right back up, and we're continuing to knock down records in terms of emissions. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, I like this quote: all pathways that limit global warming project the use of carbon dioxide removal on the order of 100 to 1,000 gigatons of CO2 by 2100. And the reason I like this quote is because for a long time, there was a lot of arguments, first about whether CDR, carbon dioxide removal, is necessary, and then a lot of arguments about how much is necessary. And people, we need a gigaton a year. We need 2 gigatons. Oh, maybe we need 10 gigatons a year. And I think the point that I like about this quote is it drives home the point that it's a lot. Okay, 100 to 1,000 gigatons by any measure is sort of a mind-boggling quantity of anything, let alone an invisible, odorless, tasteless gas that just floats in the atmosphere. So the question is, how do we get to a gigaton? Not 10 or 100 or 1,000, but how do we get our first gigaton, right? A gigaton, just for context, that's the same mass as 100 million African elephants. That's more African elephants than there are in the world, by the way. 6 million blue whales, a lot fewer than 6 million blue whales in the world. 20 times the world population. All the people in this room and all over the earth. 20 of us. That's 1 gigaton, okay? And we're talking about doing 100 or 1,000 of them by the end of century. 2, 5, 10 gigatons a year. It's just a lot, And so it's important to keep that in mind as we start discussing what technologies are best, what solutions are best, what should we be focusing our time and attention and money on, okay? So the only way the math works is to multiply the number of carbon removal ventures by as many as possible and then scale them up as much as possible. It really is, this is a kind of an all hands on deck kind of effort. And what we really need is a diversity of sustainable carbon removal solutions, and we need them all to scale in extremely significant ways. So the XPrize kind of set out to do this. The competition model is about sort of shining spotlight on an issue. You put up a outsized reward, and you say, anyone who could solve this problem, gets the big novelty check. In this case, the grand prize, $50 million, okay? Non-dilutive, cash in your pocket. And it's remarkably effective at driving attention towards the issue, right? And so it's important that you scope the competition correctly, okay? And we spent a lot of time at XPrize thinking about this. And what we arrived at for this challenge was demonstrate at kiloton scale. We can talk about why kiloton. I think kiloton is sort of an appropriate number for a demonstration in 2024. Model your costs at megaton scale. We were always concerned, and we were our sponsors kind of really pushed us towards thinking about cost. These can't be sort of impossibly expensive solutions. And then we want to see a pathway to gigaton scale. I mentioned the grand prize is $50 million. We have $100 million in total. So it's a $100 million competition. We've already awarded 20. In 2021, just not long after we launched, we gave away $5 million in student awards. That was 23 awards, ranging from 150 to 200. Sorry, that slide's wrong. $150,000 to $250,000 each. The following spring, we awarded 15 $1 million milestone awards. And the difference between those two was the student awards were directed at students, but we also weren't necessarily requiring a heavy demonstration at the time of application. Whereas for the milestones, we were. We wanted to see a proof of concept. We wanted to see that there was something that the team was doing physically to start to develop what would eventually become an end-to-end carbon dioxide removal system. And then the requirement for the grand prize is to do a full demonstration. The target scale is a kiloton, 1,000 tons in 12 months. And we have invited 20 finalists to take part in the finals. And we've given them a year to show us what they've got. That year started in February. It's going to end at the end of January. And then we're going to award the prize in April on Earth Day. And so, it's, when we launched, big splash, lots of attention. We had 1,300 teams register for the competition. So in 2021, this was a very big deal. Carbon dioxide removal was in the news. Lots of talk about carbon. The COP, the big UN climate conference that year was like a big deal. There was lots of buzz around it. But to have 1,300 teams sort of say, listen, we want to form a venture around this was really impressive. Now, not all of those teams end up going anywhere. I mean, this is kind of the nature of startups and the nature of the world. Grand ideas, it's a lot harder to execute, right? That eventually converted into, ultimately, we had 204 submissions to the finals that we collected last February. And I think that's still a pretty impressive number. I mean, that's 200 submissions of people who ostensibly have something, varying sizes and scales and stages of development. But as far as I'm concerned, like I said, it's the number up, scale up game. All comers are welcome. If you can demonstrate it, then you're welcome in the tent. So I mentioned our first funding went to 23 student teams. Here's some of their smiling faces. 31 institutions were sort of involved in those 23 student teams. Our 15 milestone winners represented 9 countries, whole different range of type of carbon dioxide removal solution types, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. And what we're ultimately shooting for is something that we can imagine deploying at scale. And so, like, these are really just photos, or renderings of what carbon dioxide removal might look like. But I'll point out in particular this one on the top top right here. This is a machine that was imagined and has since been built by a company called Climeworks. They've deployed it in Iceland. And then these geodesic domes are a CO2 injection field, again, in Iceland. And so these facilities are operating, So it's kind of happening. This crazy island thing, this is something that was imagined by one of our finalist teams called Captura. And they're a ways off from that, right? But we want to start to imagine what this might look like, okay? Okay, number up and scale up. Okay, so we're going to talk about numbering up and how we've sort of approached numbering up and how that's sort of played out in the competition so far. So, like I said, 1,300 registered teams, 204 finalist submissions, global competition. We got submissions from everywhere. It was like they were weird, wonderful, wacky, everything in between. We've been surveying the teams and tracking their growth, and so this is a graph showing venture formation over time. So for our, I think there were about 330 respondents to this survey. So of those 330, you can kind of see how there was really an explosion of interest in like 2020, 2021, and on. So, but 2021 really was a banner year for CDR. I mentioned diversity of solutions. We have been thinking about things in terms of 4 pathways, but it's very rough. It's a very rough, the taxonomy of carbon removal is very tricky because it's important to remember that carbon removal is an outcome. It's not a pathway, right? It's like if you accomplish carbon removal, it kind of doesn't matter how you do it. So, but we've been thinking about things in terms of air, ocean, land, and rocks. We've been tracking our teams in terms of what they've been working on. We also welcome hybrid solutions. Those 300 teams, this is what they told us they were going to remove in 2024. So this is like all unverified numbers, but some of these numbers are pretty impressive. We're talking about millions, hundreds of thousands and millions of tons of CO2 net removals, which, on the to-do list is to kind of like track down some of these numbers and see how many teams hit their targets. But we surveyed them on sort of the types of innovations that they're working on. The top 5 were rapid scalability, core performance, cost reduction, modularity, and products or co-benefits. I don't think that those categories are necessarily surprising, but it's sort of interesting to see how it plays out. And then we've been trying to kind of like souse out some of the trends on sort of a track-by-track basis. We're also seeing teams develop a diversity of business models. So one of the very interesting things is a majority of our teams are focused on making products. So they're not just doing carbon removals. They're not just trying to sell carbon credits, but they're trying to create a product or a co-product or a byproduct that they can sell to make money to continue to finance their growth. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, I've sort of laid out some of the top categories of materials. And I mentioned before, I kind of started at XPrize in the CO2 utilization space. And so the idea of CO2 to products is very near and dear to my heart. I think it's pretty cool. I should also mention that all of this data is available in a report that we published. It's on the XPrize website. So hit me up afterwards. I can give you the link. I probably should have put it in the slide, but I neglected to do that. So I would encourage you to download this report. There's a couple other reports that I'll mention, and you can really kind of like start to slice and dice the data. So next I'll talk about scaling up. So number 1 is numbering up. Number 2 is scaling up. And so the idea is to go from this. This is a real drawing that was submitted to one of our rounds. It is in crayon. It is showing a CDR process to this, and this is a photo of Heirloom's plant. So you guys are might be familiar with some of the work that they're doing. But we're really trying to sort of turn these concepts into reality. And I just wanted to touch base, kind of go back to this question of scale. I kind of I struggled for a long time trying to sort of think about how to justify. How to really wrap your head around the scale. And I talked about the elephants and the whales and all the rest of it. That's like, it's interesting, but it's still a little bit abstract. I wanted to compare it to a few real world things. So here we've got sort of an average US refinery. This is called the Gallup refinery. It's in the Midwest somewhere. It's kind of like a I don't know if you guys have driven past an oil refinery before. These are big industrial facilities. That represents approximately 3 million tons or 3 megatons of CO2 per year, like if, in terms of like number of molecules moving through those pipes, And so, and meanwhile, one of the largest, I think the largest refinery in the world is in India, and that's like 120 million tons of CO2 per year. And so the point there is that these are some of the largest industrial facilities on Earth, and we're not talking about gigatons here, right? We're talking about megaton scale facilities, okay? Likewise, there's a couple of sort of just very rough rough examples of some sort of land-oriented things. So the average U.S. farm might be managing something like 1,000 tons a year of CO2, whereas one of the largest farms in the world might be sort of at that megaton scale, right? And not much bigger than that. Oh, here's one of our reports. Okay, I did put the slide in. So you should download that report and check it out. I think it's pretty interesting. It's a lot of data to chew on, and it just kind of gives you a sense of the lay of the land, at least as it stands today. And what we did, we kind of divided that report into 3 chapters. The first stop is kiloton. Okay, so what are teams doing today? And I like this chart. This chart shows our top 100 teams, their net emissions. Okay, so the bars that are pointing up are emissions, the bars that are pointing down are removals, and then the black dot represents their net emissions. And one of the things that I like about this chart is you can really, first of all, you can kind of see, diversity. There's bigger projects, there's smaller projects. Some projects are much more emissive than others. I think this is really important because, like this big purple bar here, they're really emitting a lot. They're removing a lot, so their net removals are good, but they're still emitting a lot, right? So we better make sure that we're counting the removals properly, right? And this is where we kind of start talking about, there's a concept called MRV, measurement, reporting, and verification. There's a lot of angst in the world about MRV right now. Because for just this reason, we really have to make sure that we're carefully tracking and verifying and making sure that the removals that are promised are actually happen. Otherwise, what are we doing? We're just contributing to the problem. Next stop, megaton. So we asked teams, when are you going to hit a megaton? And what do you think your scale is going to be over years? And so each of these lines represents a venture's, one of the top 100 ventures estimates of their scale between now and 2030. I should say early 2024 and 2030. And you can kind of see how they all, some of them are quite aggressive. You can see this, the classic hockey stick. Very, very ambitious scaling goals. But what was interesting about this aspect of our study was that people are really focused on 2030. This notion of 2030 targets is really powerful, and it's been powerful both in the sense that we've seen a lot of corporations and governments sort of align around 2030 as being our sort of the year that we need to get our act together, but it's also sort of been it's a real important milestone for the innovation space and the startup space as well. And then destination gigaton. I didn't know what image to show from this chapter. I like this one because it kind of hints at some of the trade-offs that we see across different solutions. The red dots are energy use, and then the green bars are land use. And so you can kind of see how there's all of the large land users, or most of the large land users, are low energy users. And you know, by and large, the higher energy users use less land. And what we've been, you know, where this kind of leads you is this idea of sort of like geospatially, like what types of carbon solutions are appropriate for different types of places. If you've got a lot of land and not a lot of pressure on the land, then maybe some of these land solutions are good for you. If you've got a lot of low carbon energy, then you know we can use some of these higher energy solutions. And then the last thing I'll mention is we've done a lot of work on responsible deployment. Again, when we're talking about sort of this scale and magnitude of deployment, it's impossible to avoid. Running into challenges with competing resources, with challenges with communities who don't understand or appreciate what you're doing. And so we've been working quite a bit with our teams to help. What we're really trying to do is sort of develop broad fluency around environmental justice and responsible deployment. This is another area where we've published a couple of white papers, so you can check those out on our website. We have published information both on strategies that startups can use to approach responsible deployment sort of from day one of a venture's formation, as well as some guidance for how funders can think about responsible deployment as they're making funding decisions. So I wanted to, this is kind of like the most exciting part of the presentation for me, because we have spent the last, basically since May, visiting our top 20 teams. We have to visit all 20 of them. We've done 10 so far. And I wanted to show you some photos, because it's really cool. If you've never sort of been to the field to see some of these things operating, it's like so much different than, you know, for years I've been like looking at these concepts on paper, you know, and reading the spreadsheets and like talking to people on the phone. And there's nothing like showing up and actually getting to sort of see things in action. And it's both for the technology as well as about the team and how the team is interacting with their community and how they're thinking about building things out and all the good work that they're doing. So, so I'll just point out, I don't think all 20 teams made it on my slides, but I just want to talk through each of them real quick. This is the top left is a direct air capture company called Octavia Carbon. They're located in Kenya. And this box here, I haven't seen this one in person yet. I'm looking forward to going there later this year. In the top right, this is Heirloom, direct air capture company located in California. They're also building a very large plant in Louisiana as part of the DAC Hubs program, which is a US government-funded initiative. So that's really exciting. And this company here is called SkyRenew. They're located in Quebec. And this company is called AirHive, and they're currently deploying. They're a UK-based company, but they're deploying in Western Canada. And one of the things that I love about direct air capture is like the machines are so unique. There's kind of like a whole bunch of different ways to skin the cat, and I love the creativity that the designers and the engineers have brought to trying to experiment with different types of architectures and different types of chemicals and different types of processes to make direct air capture not only work, we know it works. The big challenge is getting the cost and in particular the energy consumption down. In the ocean space, we've got a company called Captura on the top left. Their demonstration is in Los Angeles. They're also working on some deployments elsewhere. The top right, this is a company called, I should say Captura does direct ocean capture. So they use an electrochemical process called electrodialysis that actually pulls CO2 out of seawater. So the idea is if you pull CO2 out of seawater, then you put the CO2 lean seawater back in the ocean, then that will actually draw CO2 out of the atmosphere over time through a process called Henry's Law. So they actually produce CO2 out of the ocean. This team on the top right, this is a team called Planetary, and my team was in Halifax visiting them last week. They are using a method called ocean alkalinity enhancement. So they're dissolving minerals in seawater to make the seawater more alkaline and then encourage the CO2 to come out of the air and go in. So you've kind of got two effects. You're both deacidifying the ocean and drawing down CO2. The bottom left, this is a company called Kelp Blue. They operate in Namibia and they grow kelp. And it's a great example of leveraging natural processes, leveraging biomass to sequester CO2. And a big challenge there is finding the right places to do it. You have to be really careful about where what kinds of kelp you grow where. You've got concerns about invasive species. You've got concerns about nutrient management and unintended consequences and stuff like that. But they're a really cool team, and they operate in a part of the world where they're also trying to leverage a lot of or sort of spur a lot of development activity in that part of the world, which is pretty cool. And then this on the bottom right, this is a photo from a company called Ebb, and they are also an electrochemical process. Their sort of core technology looks a lot like Captura's, but the way they implement it is different. They're kind of almost a combination of what Captura does and what Planetary does, in the sense that their objective is to deacidify the ocean. In a land track, the top left, this is Takachar. This is the Takavator 1000. For those of you who know Takachar's business, so they make actually three of the four of the teams on this slide make biochar. So the idea is you take biomass and you turn it into char, which stabilizes the carbon, and then they use it in agriculture. They use it as basically a organic fertilizer. So Takachar on the top right, Net Zero on the top left. This is a very cool. It's a French company. They operate in Brazil. Bottom left, this is a company called Applied Robotics. Sorry. They just changed their name, so I'm blanking on it. So I want to I want to make sure I get that right. But so I might have to follow up with you on that. And then this team is called Lithos. Lithos is one of the teams that's using a technique called enhanced rock weathering. They mine and they source basalt dust, and if you spread this over the land, it dissolves, and in dissolving, it absorbs CO2. So it's kind of an interesting technique with an intersection with agriculture. And then rocks. Some cool stuff happening here. This is actually one of the Basalt Mines. We've got a few teams that are working on enhanced rock weathering. This is a wellhead run by a company called Vaulted that takes bioslurry, which is biogenically sourced, basically pulp. It's poop. Okay, it's waste. It's solid waste. And they inject it into reservoirs underground. This is a company called Carbon Cure. They mineralize CO2 in the construction industry. And then this robot here is by a company called Arca, and they take mine tailings and carbonate the mine tailings. So I just kind of wanted to walk you through a few of those teams and emphasize how cool it is to see stuff actually happening, And I'd be more than happy to answer questions if you have any about any of these teams afterwards. And I just wanted to close because I know I'm speaking on campus today, and so I kind of see myself as a recruiter of sorts, okay? Because again, when you think about the scale of the issue, the magnitude, we talk about gigatons, we talk about engineering, we talk about moving tons of material around. This is going to take a lot of people, okay? And there's a lot of opportunities in carbon tech right now, and I say carbon tech and not carbon removal because the carbon space I think is worth emphasizing is a lot broader than just carbon removal. So get in on it. I think it's a great industry. It's a growth industry. There's a few folks have been sort of trying to keep track of all that's going on in this case in the carbon removal industry, and you can see how many ventures are popping up. And it's worth noting that it's not all just technology and project developers, right? We've got suppliers, we've got auditors, we've got sort of ecosystem partners, we've got standards people, insurance. We really every vocation and trade is required to stand up an industry like this. And there was actually just in the last month or two the first salary survey that I've seen from focused on CDR. And so this is a report you can download, and you can get a sense of the fact that there's like legitimate career prospects. This isn't just kind of this is something that you can sort of it's a real industry that we can sustain economically. So I wanted to just throw up a couple of resources. I didn't want to overwhelm you guys, but if you're interested in learning more about carbon removal, these are four very good resources that I like and often reference. And that's it for my slides. So I think we've still got some time left, and I'd love to hang out and answer questions, and we can talk about the teams, we could talk about carbon tech, but I appreciate your attention, and I love being with you guys today. So thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. So I know you mentioned like 2 out of the 20 teams. Does being part of XPrize in general help their chances of like getting VC funding? Like, to what extent will all 20 of them have some sort of funding opportunities just being part of this? Like,
yeah, that's a very good question. So first of all, it's kind of a harsh model in the sense that the winners get a bunch of money and the losers get nothing. We don't actually give funding up front. So if you don't get a share in one of the prize purses, then you don't get anything from XPrize. But we do like to think, and we've got some evidence to show that participating in an XPrize does have a lot of benefits. There's the publicity aspect. There's it's kind of it's a nice brand, and so people like that. But we also do pretty rigorous due diligence, and part of what I do is try to make sure that people know that and see the value in what we're doing and share what we're doing. We also, like all of our due diligence activities, they result in reports and stuff like that. We'll give those to the teams, right? And the teams can give them to their prospective funders and things like that. So there's like fringe benefits, I would say, to participating in an XPrize. The publicity is huge. I think the pressure cooker helps. We ask teams to do something really hard and really audacious on a fixed calendar, and being able to do that and go through the process and get through verification and manage all of that, I think makes teams move faster and ultimately makes them sharper. And I've had lots of teams, come to me after the sting wears off, didn't win the prize or whatever, but say, look, some variation on the story of, look, it was a really good journey, a really helpful type of thing. So I mean, I can't say that everybody feels universally good about not winning a prize, but I think what we really think about is how to use the prize not just to award one technology or say this is our silver bullet, but we're using the program as a platform to build a whole industry. And I think that's, I hope that point is sort of reinforced by some of the slides and the graphs and reports and stuff like that I mentioned before. So anyways, I hope that answered your question. Yeah.
What are some different ways to monetize the... Hi. So I just wanted to ask about some of the popular ways that you can monetize that captured carbon, and what are the costs of storages and the different methods that you talk about?
Yeah. Okay. So the question is about sort of the business models question and how to monetize things. I mean, the big categories that we see are the sale of credits. So this is on the voluntary market. It's like somebody will pay you $100 to sequester a ton of CO2. I showed on one of my slides that the majority of our teams have some kind of co-product or co-benefit that they sell. So in that case, some teams are really, if you're doing that, it's funny because a team has to decide, do you want to prioritize product or do you want to prioritize carbon, right? Or what are you optimizing for? And so that's actually a kind of a tricky question, and every venture I think has a different perspective on that. But that's a nice way to make sure that a business has some reliable income if you're making something that's not sort of reliant on the voluntary markets. The voluntary markets are really squishy right now, so pricing is a little bit weird and stuff like that. The last thing you mentioned was about cost, and I think that's an important point because you'll see a lot of headlines in the news right now about offtake and supply agreements and things like that. So like recently, in the last couple of weeks, a company called Holocene sold a bunch of carbon removal credits to Google, and they sold. I can't remember all the salient details. $100 a ton, okay? And so there was a lot of ink spilled about like, oh great, like DAC is coming down in price and stuff like that. No, it's not. They're selling at a loss. And so the idea of price and what the market is willing to pay for carbon and the cost of delivering those removals is like, those are totally different things and they're very easy to conflate. So, just keep that in mind as you're reading some of those headlines. Keep that in mind if you're talking to startups. I think everybody has to be really, really honest with, at the very least themselves and preferably with everybody else about what realistic cost curves look like and how we're going to sort of square those, the market expectations against the cost of delivery. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of a related question, but in some of those products or utilization pathways, do XCarbon companies see, XPrize, but do the companies see like actual demand for these products that use captured carbon?
Yeah.
Like, can you just talk about how that landscape or trend has been?
Yeah, I think everyone is really interested in the promise of low carbon products. The market size, like the addressable market, is very big. The issue is always about cost. And again, it's like what is the cost of a low carbon product against the cost of the incumbent? In some cases, it can be quite significant. What I've seen is some really interesting and creative ways to try and get around that. One of the best examples is a company called Air Company. They're in Brooklyn. They make vodka out of CO2. But they don't make vodka, they make ethanol, right? And it just so happens that ethanol can be used as a fuel. Ethanol is also vodka, okay? And so when they first started, they were a fuel company, right? But their fuel might have been thousands of dollars a gallon, right? And what they realized was it's kind of nonsensical to try and sell into the fuels market because they can only make a little bit anyways, right? And so what they realized was we can actually sell our little bits of ethanol as vodka and we can get a premium. So that's not the only example, but I think it's a good example of just someone being quite clever about trying to figure out the best way to get paid for what they're doing. And there's a little bit of value in green premium, and there's I think there's ways to leverage that, but I think there's a lot of ways beyond that you can get creative about it. Yeah.
Got it. I had a question about, especially for some of the technologies and the processes, I think there can be a potential of second order effects or unintended consequences, and I think that's kind of been a big debate, especially about ocean engineering, those kind of topics. So how do you think about making progress but safeguarding against something like that?
I think that first of all, I think that that's broadly recognized. And I think at least from my perspective, most everybody in the field does recognize that that's of critical importance. We don't have, outside of the carbon community though, there isn't necessarily universal appreciation for what we're trying to do. And so there's a lot of people who are really focused on the risks and rightly so. I am a big believer in getting into the details, into the nuances. And I think that a big part of it is has to be sort of, I hate to say it, but kind of on a case-by-case basis. It really depends. I mean, especially when we're talking about the ocean, there's like lots of CDR solutions. You know, if you take a given piece of coastline or given piece of ocean, there might be 100 CDR solutions that would not be appropriate, but there might be one that is appropriate. You know, given the circumstances, you know, given the nutrient content and given the ocean current situation and given the, you know, the human activity around that place. So I think that there's it's really important for all of us not to charge into these concepts with the idea that we can just kind of like blanket the earth and you know like forget the idea that there's a silver bullet. There is no silver bullet. But even the idea that something can be sort of cut paste willy-nilly all over the world, I don't think is appropriate. I think we have to be really careful and really nuanced. I'll also say, you know, we've seen. I think my microphone just ran out of batteries. Oh, thanks. Thank you. I'll hand this to you if you don't mind. Thank you. I think we're already seeing some examples of projects getting shut down by concerns in the local community, or you know, well, there can be a number of reasons why a project sort of gets stalled due to ecological or environmental concerns. But we're already seeing some of those happen. So it just reinforces the idea that we have to be very, very methodical and very careful as we approach each project. Yeah.
Follow up to these questions about the commercial, the byproducts. It's a business school, so you know. I'm curious how you guys assess their commercial viability as part of who you will, you know, give the final prize to, and how important that is compared to impact metrics.
We're not really diving deep into business models, and when it comes to commercial viability, I think about it more from like, I'm an engineer, admittedly, so I approach it more from sort of like the engineer's perspective. So if a company's saying we're producing ethanol, right? And we're going to sell it for $12 a ton or something like that. Then I want to know, is it actually ethanol? You know, and does it meet the specification that can allow you to sell it for $12 a ton? But I'm not really like looking at like forward cost curves and trying to understand or like prognosticate how those markets are going to evolve into the future. I'll say finally that our focus on cost is really on understanding the cost side of things. Like we want to understand what the costs are involved in doing the removals, and then we think about revenues kind of separately to that. So that's how we do things in the prize, right?
I know in the voluntary markets, there's an emphasis on like high quality credits versus lower quality credits. And so is that part of your assessment as well?
We have a durability threshold of 100 years. So we want to see CO2 that can be sort of seen as having been reliably sequestered for at least 100 years. When people say high quality, that can mean a couple of different things. Normally, that's code for 1,000 years or more. That's kind of how a few of the quality advocates have taken it. We wanted to keep things a little bit broader. I think, you know, my personal view is that the urgency of the climate crisis demands more solutions, and so we tried to be as sort of open and unrestrictive as possible. But durability is really important, and it wouldn't have been appropriate, for example, for us to allow, for example, a CO2 fuels company. You know, that can't be called carbon removal because the fuels are combusted and go back to the atmosphere very quickly. So we landed on 100 years. We believed that kept the door open for some interesting nature-based solutions, and we've seen a few of those types of solutions in the competition. So anyways, that's kind of my perspective on durability. If you've got other questions on quality, I'm more than happy to keep pulling on that thread. Yeah.
Hey, I'll ask probably like a higher level question, and maybe I'll ask you to put your recruiter hat back on for a minute. But I was an engineer as well, you know, coming out of undergrad, and now a lot of us, obviously in the business school, are looking for, we have a different skill set that we're trying to bring to the career market and everything else. I think all of the technical details and going to the field and everything, that's fascinating to me, and I'm sure a lot of folks here as well. But I mean, maybe at a higher level, could you share a little qualitatively, like what kind of, skills someone from business school could bring into this market and into these potential ventures, and kind of what they could be looking for from our tools that we have now?
I mean, we're talking about businesses. So, businesses need accountants, they need lawyers, they need human resource professionals, they need marketers. So there's I think there's, in terms of like whatever, like the job descriptions or whatever, there's a lot of opportunities in a lot of these ventures. I think that right now most of these ventures are small ventures. So if you haven't worked for a startup before, that's the kind of environment where you have to wear a lot of hats and you have to develop fairly broad fluency. I'm a big believer in technical fluency. Okay, and a couple of the resources that I put on the second to last slide will sort of help you develop an understanding and develop that the kind of, frankly, the jargon of carbon dioxide removal. There's a lot of acronyms. There's a lot of and I think it's really helpful for everybody, regardless of your background, to kind of try and do sort of at the very least some sort of like self-training in engineering and science. Because I think it's inevitable that if you're engaging in this career, then you just have to be fluent in those issues. And that's not just working in startups too, right? I mean, if you're working for an investment fund or an NGO or a policy shop or what have you, you still need to be able to engage with those technical issues. So yeah, technical fluency is one. I talked about fluency around environmental justice. I think that's another really important thing. I think that it's kind of it's our collective responsibility as professionals, frankly, to make sure that we're all sort of attuned to the issues and respectful in how our efforts as professionals and as companies influences the world around us. So just a couple of thoughts. Yeah.
Michael, is it
Yeah.
okay if I share the deck out after?
Yeah,
this?
yeah,
And
yeah,
then they'll have
sure.
the links
Yeah.
to the resources. Right.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Google bought the credits for $100, right, per
Yeah.
metric ton. Was that correct? And that was a big gap between like what it cost and they were selling at a loss. What is like the average cost, and like how long do you think it'll take to
Yeah.
like close the gap?
I don't know anything about that specific deal. I don't know what their actual costs are. I know that it's more than 100, or I can safely speculate that it's well above the $100 a ton. I think there have been a couple of reports published that dig into that question. There's been a lot of studies on sort of the cost projections and stuff like that. In DAC in particular, I know the Department of Energy has been quite focused on trying to bring down the cost of direct air capture. In our survey of the top 100 teams, we polled them on their costs, and the average across all 100 teams was $211 a ton. There's a very, very large spread, everywhere from sort of like 10 to like 2,000 or more, So it really does span the range. In general, the sort of the engineered solutions, the direct air capture, the direct ocean capture, anything that uses like electrolysis and stuff like that tends to be very expensive. Every developer out there will tell you all the great ways that all the great ideas they have for trying to bring down those costs. But it's just hard to say. Yeah. I will say on that point, it's hard to say, and it's also important not to take it for granted. I've heard some people talk about cost reductions like it's going to happen naturally, like we drove down the costs in the solar industry by 100x over however many years, and so it's kind of like inevitable. I just don't think it's inevitable. I think it's important to remember that it's like, especially in comparison to solar, it's not an apples to apples thing. It's like different classes of technology, and there's like different sort of like thermodynamics at play, But that's not to say that there aren't opportunities. There's lots of opportunities to drive down the cost, I mean.
Hi, could you talk a little bit about the government incentives and which countries are more favorable to this industry? Because a lot of the questions are regarding the business and the cost model of
Yeah.
this, and majority of the funding seem to be coming from either the investments or the government. So which areas are most favorable for this business?
The big one in the U.S. is the 45Q tax credit, which I think might be only limited to direct air capture. It was actually designed to incentivize emissions reduction. But it includes some forms of CDR. That gives you a tax credit. You know, I can't. Don't ask me to tell you what the number is. It might be like $80 or $100 a ton or something like that. Many countries have put a price on carbon. You know, as a carbon tax. You know, there's a carbon tax in Canada, and it goes up over time. I think it's like $100 now. It'll go up to $140 or $160 in the next few years. You know, a lot of these carbon taxes, the governments that collect those taxes try to redirect the money. So they redirect that money as incentives and as research funding and stuff like that. So that's a long way of saying there's a lot of money flowing into the space that's from the public sector, and that comes in the form of, well, yeah, grants, early funding. The infrastructure bill that was passed a couple years ago here in the States, you know, I can't remember how big it is, a couple $1 billion anyways. I think they just announced in the last couple of weeks $1.8 billion, I think, in support for what they call mid-size direct air capture. They define mid-size as 2,000 to 50,000 tons per year, which is pretty nice. So we're seeing a lot of money flow into the space from the public sector, but I think the big question is how long is that going to last and how stable is it? And the answer is nobody knows. So I think that the prevailing attitude is we need to have some sense of stability in the voluntary markets to support the industry. Right now, in CDR anyways, the voluntary markets are dominated by a very small number of large buyers: Microsoft, Frontier, Stripe, Amazon. A few of the other big tech companies are starting to buy CDR credits, but we need that customer base to grow, and I think we need sort of a sense of sort of a stronger foundation of a sense that we know what the rules are, and there's going to be some stability to the markets going forward. I don't really know how to accomplish that, but that's kind of what we need. Yeah.
It's like super relevant for me. I work part-time at a climate VC firm, and I'm writing a memo on ebb carbon right now, which is one of the 4 ocean ones. So this is hopefully interesting to everyone, but particularly pertinent to me. What would you say are some of the major benefits of, well, I'm personally very interested in the ocean-based methods right now for my memo, but then I think it would be interesting to hear what are the unique benefits about the other 3 as well.
The basic premise of the ocean is that it's already the dominant carbon pump in the world, right? The exchange of CO2 between the air and the oceans is I don't know, it's thousands of gigatons a year or something like that. I don't quote me on the numbers, but the idea of sort of exchanging CO2 between the air and the ocean is sort of really well understood at the global scale, and then there's also lots of opportunities for leveraging the ocean in the sense that it's very abundant in nutrients in some places, it's very abundant in oxygen in some places, very very abundant in biodiversity, and in a lot of ways it's also not necessarily under a lot of competing demand. So the idea of like sort of leveraging what the ocean has to offer is really really attractive, and that you can kind of circumvent some of the concerns that you might run into on a land-based thing. So that's very general, but somebody that I know in the space talks about the ocean as being sort of the Earth's contactor. That's a very sort of like technocratic way of saying it can do what the direct air capture machines do sort of on its own. by its ability to absorb CO2 out of the ocean. And so it means we don't have to build a contactor, right? So all we have to do is figure out how to sort of like wrangle the CO2 molecules once they're in the ocean already. And so that's kind of one of the premises of sort of the direct ocean capture model. But yeah, I mean, what else can I say? I think that there's pros and cons to all of those tracks. I mean, the land track, there's we're leveraging photosynthesis, we're leveraging biological processes that are already, they kind of like sustain themselves, and in many ways sustain themselves in ways with a lot of positive co-benefits. Right, and so I would say that's true in both the air or in the sort of the land track and the ocean track. Whereas direct air capture tends to have a smaller footprint, and they tend to be machines that, frankly, we as humans are good at building already. If you think about a refinery, like we've done a few of those, so we can do it again. And then for the last track for rocks, I'll say the abundance of minerals that can help us out is really important. Some people use natural sources of minerals, and some people use waste sources of minerals. So there's a lot of alkaline mine wastes that we can put to good use. So I think it's like the key to all of this is sort of like leveraging the advantages that are inherent in the playing field. That's kind of what we're looking on, or what we're trying to look at. I don't know, just a few thoughts. Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, please.
Following up on the part about kind of public support, and some of these are temporary, as you mentioned, or there's not a clear kind of long-term support. But you mentioned DAC Hubs earlier. Can you talk about that program and whether the competitors for the XPrize are leveraging their applications or trying to find collaborations with them, and whether it's been, like in what ways it's been a positive experience, or whether there's any kind of challenges still to making use of these public resources?
Yeah, I think it's been useful in a couple of ways. It's a lot of money flowing into the space. It's created a lot of buzz and attention in the space, which I think is really good. It's in a lot of ways sort of created a permission structure to develop some of these projects in ways that might have been harder to accomplish before. We still have a ways to go. I mean, the issue with the teams that are competing in the Carbon XPrize tend to be quite small, right? Demonstrations at a kiloton scale are kind of like, they're significant from a demonstration perspective, from a human perspective, but they're puny from a climate perspective. And what the DAC Hubs program is ultimately trying to accomplish is getting sort of that megaton scale DAC facilities up and running. So what we've seen is a lot of those hubs end up being a consortium of interests, and quite a few of the XPrize teams have become involved in those consortiums, and some of them are building bigger facilities in those hubs, and some of them are participating in other ways. So I think it's one of those things where it's been quite helpful to sort of have that program exist. As with all government programs, it's like a little bit slow, and like I'm not sure how much of the money's arrived yet, but frankly we also need time for these startups to kind of spin up as well. But I will also say that the DOE, I think, has been very thoughtful about how to deploy that money in ways that is sort of not just helpful to those who can build really big, really fast, but they are really focused on trying to sort of strengthen the ecosystem more broadly and get a diversity of solutions funded. So I think that's been helpful.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks everyone.